Even the most hardcore Star Wars fan would hardly call the movies precise works of art. Most of the films were created amid tremendous turmoil and adversity, the result of hundreds of talented artists pooling their resources to do best justice to the material as written. As such, things don't always go 100% according to plan, or perhaps anywhere close to it. I'm Ewan, you're watching What Culture Star Wars, and here are times Star Wars filmed things you weren't meant to see. Luke's lightsaber is made in New York. The Empire Strikes Back. As will become quickly apparent from this list, the earlier Star Wars movies in particular didn't give much thought to the future of home video, where crystal clear 4K releases would allow every last imperfection and mistake to eventually be discovered. Case in point, when Luke Skywalker is trying to grab his lightsaber and escape the Wampa Cave in The Empire Strikes Back, those who look closely might notice that the saber has the word New York branded on the bottom. This is much easier to spot on the Disney Plus 4K release than it ever has been before, and for a franchise said to be set in a galaxy far, far away, it sure does shatter the audience's immersion for just a brief second. The rebel officer wearing platform shoes, A New Hope. Here's one that totally defies categorization. At the very end of A New Hope, when Luke, Han, and Chewie are being celebrated at the Rebel base, keep your eye on one of the Rebel officers on the right-hand side of the screen. Just after the three heroes begin ascending the steps, the assembled rebels turn inwards, and for a moment, one of the officers can be seen wearing some very stylish platform shoes. While you might at first assume that the actor playing the officer was given the shoes due to his diminutive height, considering that many other officers near him are much smaller, there doesn't seem to be a practical reason for it. It's more likely that the costume department ran out of normal flat shoes and just had to make do with whatever they had lying around, and understandably assumed folks wouldn't ever notice. And again, it was also the 70s, and disco was in its prime. Accidental alien nudity, Episode 6. If you assumed Leia's slave costume was the raciest moment in Star Wars' cinematic history, think again. During the iconic sequence at Jabba the Hutt's palace, you'll probably remember the distinctive green-skinned Twi'lek alien Ula, who danced for Jabba and, after resisting his advances, was dropped into the Rancor pit to be devoured. But for a brief moment, as Jabba is yanking Ula towards him, Femi Taylor experiences a bit of a wardrobe malfunction, with her bare chest becoming visible to the audience for almost a second. The low lighting helps conceal it, but it's not that difficult to notice. Weirdly, despite Disney digitally altering nudity in movies like Splash for release on Disney Plus, this moment of accidental nudity remains untouched in the current version of Episode 6 on the streaming platform. Liam Neeson's wig mesh, The Phantom Menace. The Phantom Menace was the final Star Wars film to be shot on 35mm until the release of The Force Awakens, though fans weren't able to savor every morsel of that detail at home until its recent 4K HDR release on both Disney Plus and Ultra HD disc. But once again, the higher resolution lays bare subtle visual details which George Lucas seemingly assumed he could get away with while shooting the movie. When Qui-Gon Jinn is on screen, for instance, 4K viewers may well notice an occasionally visible wig mesh on his forehead, because, shocker, Qui-Gon's flowing mane of locks weren't grown out by the actor himself. Though wig mesh is usually concealed so well that audiences don't ever notice it, it's actually visible in many of Neeson's scenes, and once you do see it, you likely won't be able to stop yourself eyeballing it throughout the movie. Just like Ewan McGregor's also terrible wig that he has in this film. God, there's a lot of hair trouble going on here. Number 6. Lando's action figure stand-in, The Empire Strikes Back. At the very end of The Empire Strikes Back, a wounded Luke is scooped up by the Millennium Falcon, with Lando opening up the Falcon's top hatch and allowing Luke to drop in. But if you look closely, when Lando opens the hatch and rises out of the opening, it's hilariously clear that it isn't actor Williams nor even an actual human being, but simply an immobile miniature action figure being lifted from beneath. In recent releases, the featureless face of Lando is somewhat more noticeable if you pause at the right moment, with it even being apocryphally suggested among fans that the model is in fact an off-the-shelf G.I. Joe figurine rather than an actual Lando mock-up. C-3PO's magically moving wires. The Rise of Skywalker. Though the newer Star Wars films are generally better proofed against the revealing possibilities of higher resolution displays, at least until we reach 8K presentation in the future, there is one telling visual gaffe in The Rise of Skywalker. Just before the crew of heroes heads to Kijimi to extract the Sith text from C-3PO's memory, he memorably takes one last look at his pals. A few seconds earlier, however, as C-3PO gets up and says if this mission fails, it was all for nothing, keen-eyed viewers might notice the droid's exposed wiring magically moving out of the ceiling on its own. No, this wasn't the doing of Babu Frick, the Hey, who the scene establishes was much closer to the ground, but presumably a stagehand feeding the wires through the ceiling to give Daniels enough room to move without snagging himself as he walks around the room. Why not just have the wires be that slack in the first place? Another thing that doesn't make sense about The Rise of Skywalker. The stick that topples an AT-AT, The Empire Strikes Back. In The Empire Strikes Back's mesmerizing Battle of Hoth, who can forget the fist-pumping moment where Luke single-handedly destroys an AT-AT by cutting a hole in it with his lightsaber and then throwing a grenade inside? The explosive damage causes the mechanical behemoth to topple over in defeat, an awe-inspiring visual that still looks incredible over 40 years on. Except for one teeny tiny mistake, that is. Keep an eye on the AT-AT's rightmost foot and you can briefly see a stick emerging from underneath it, nudging it to make it fall over. Given that the AT-ATs were all miniatures, it follows that this is the act of a crew member manually topping the walker, and understandably assuming that audiences would be so blown away by the effect that they wouldn't think to notice that sneaky stick. Lucas could easily have a VFX artist paint this out over their morning coffee if he wished, though in complete fairness it's another revealing visual which only really became apparent once the film hit 4K. Obi-Wan's lightsaber wire, A New Hope. As gripping as Obi-Wan's fateful clash with Darth Vader is in A New Hope, once you notice a strange wire emanating from Obi-Wan's lightsaber, you'll never be able to unsee it, so sorry about that. The lightsaber effect itself was generated through a combination of in-camera and post-production trickery. On set, the actors held thin wooden tubes coated with reflective material, which had bright spotlights shone onto it to give off a fluorescent hue. The coloring and enhanced lighting effects were then rotoscoped over the film footage in post, creating one of the most iconic effects and weapons in movie history. But due to technical restrictions, these tubes needed to be powered by a cable during shooting, and little attempt was made to hide them by, painting the cable black or brown. As such, they're extremely easy to spot if you know where to look, periodically stripping the mystery away and reminding everyone that the actors were basically just holding toy sticks while filming. The stormtrooper hitting his head, A New Hope. There isn't a more iconic gaffe in the history of the Star Wars franchise than George Lucas failing to notice a stormtrooper bumping his head in on the way to the Death Star's control room in A New Hope. Though several actors have claimed to be the infamously clumsy stormtrooper over the last 4+ decades, actor Laurie Good might be the most credible of the lot, claiming that a bout of intestinal discomfort caused him to rush to set and bonk his head. However, he assumed that the accident hadn't been captured on film and was shocked to see it included in the end product. The bump has been widely parodied countless times over the years, with Lucas himself even getting in on the joke by having Jango Fett smack his head in similar fashion in Attack of the Clones. Though it's an undeniable mistake in every sense of the word, Star Wars just wouldn't be the same without that absent-minded stormtrooper.
Anakin Skywalker's hand is briefly fleshy. Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith. The Chosen One infamously lost his right arm during his battle with Count Dooku during the events of Attack of the Clones. This eventually results in Anakin Skywalker having a cybernetic arm installed before the film reaches its end, and the Jedi Knight would then go on to largely wear a glove over his robotic limb throughout Revenge of the Sith. Unlike his son's eventual cybernetic replacement limb that would be installed at the end of The Empire Strikes Back though, Anakin's arm doesn't boast the synthetic skin used to make these fake limbs feel a little more realistic, which is what what makes a moment when a recently turned Skywalker arrives on Mustafar rather odd when looking a little closer. After a now Darth Vader tells R2-D2 to stay with the ship in episode 3, zone in on his hands as he lifts his hood over his head. Not only is Skywalker not boasting his usual right-hand glove to cover his robo-arm, but Hayden Christensen's digitally unaltered mitt can also be clearly spotted. And with his trademark glove being very much present in the subsequent massacring of the Separatist leaders, it definitely feels like this was little more than a blink and you'll miss it error Lucas was hoping no one would notice. But we did! The camera crew is reflected in C-3PO's head. Episode 5, The Empire Strikes Back. Reflections can be a right pain in the ass when it comes to the filming process. Just ask Irving Kershner and George Lucas. The latter had to overcome the problem of his shiny protocol droid creation by the name of C-3PO, reflecting his beloved green/blue screens during the making of Revenge of the Sith. In fact, each frame that contained the legendary droid had to be repainted in post-production by the poor VFX team thanks to his pesky armor. However, with that sort of technology not being available back when Kershner was bringing The Empire Strikes Back to screens, the director was actually forced to leave in an easily missed reflection accident. As 3PO's head is seen moving along a conveyor belt on Bespin, you can actually see some of the camera team in his reflection just before the head is picked up by an Ugnaught garbage disposal worker. Chewbacca may have been able to save 3PO from being disintegrated, but he couldn't keep the camera crew from making a rather unintentional cameo mid-episode 5. Padme's charging dress, episode 1, The Phantom Menace. Throughout episode 1, Queen of the Naboo Padme Amidala shows off some pretty outrageous threads. Along with a rather impressive travelling gown, the ruler of the Naboo boasted an instantly iconic red dress during the moment her planet was invaded by the Trade Federation. But in order to power an item of clothing that possessed glowing orange orbs hovering above the ground, it seems as though this royal couldn't ever be too far away from a plug socket. After spotting said balls of bright orange on the garms, your eyes have no choice but to follow what looks like a black cable coming out of the dress. This cable can be seen coming out of one of the palace's walls, where it was no doubt attached to a power source to keep this beloved queen from running out of juice. Lucas was likely hoping his waves of CGI droids would divert attention away from such a hilarious oversight. Yet 20 years on, it's still hard to get through this scene without cracking a smile at the mind behind the galaxy far, far away accidentally making a plugged-in Amidala cannon. What is he like, eh? Luke's rather bizarre drop-down, episode 5, The Empire Strikes Back. Returning to episode 5's trip to Bespin now, and to a mistake that just about everyone overlooked during one of the most iconic duels in movie history. With Luke Skywalker locking lightsabers with a Dark Lord of the Sith who would soon be revealed as his daddy, the former knocked the latter off a platform before following the Sith into the darkness. And it's during that descent when Mark Hamill is found very much dropping down from up high, only to suddenly pop back up for a brief second before the action cuts to Luke landing in front of a tunnel. It's an easily missed gaffe, but once you spot Hamill quickly bobbing back up in one shot before being shown to land and immediately make his way down a tunnel which suddenly opens up in the next, it's glaringly obvious that someone missed the star's late jolt back up to an upright position when cutting together the two shots. Or maybe this bouncing Skywalker just enjoyed another short force jump before continuing his pursuit of his legendary father. Is that a gardening glove in space? Episode 6, Return of the Jedi. While the language we recognise as English appears to be spoken in this galaxy far, far away, the likes of Han Solo, Luke Skywalker, and many, many more are actually speaking Galactic Basic, a language that is usually written in Aurebesh. That being said, the odd bit of English has still found a way to wiggle into the Skywalker saga over the years. And Return of the Jedi once again accidentally showed off a brief piece of rather familiar text as Solo and the gang prepared to destroy the shield generator on Endor. The camera lingers on the glove of a rebel before they throw a charge to the smuggler turned freedom fighter, revealing what looks like the words Thorn Armor or Thorn Guard on them. This seems to point to the gloves being used for gardening on our planet. And with everything from camera parts to car engines being used to create lightsabers and alien drink dispensers in the original trilogy respectively, it's not that surprising to hear that Lucas and co may have kitted out their rebels in gardening attire too. Whatever the English words etched on those mitts are though, the fact they are present at all still sits as a mistake the folks behind the camera were not expecting you to notice in a pre-4K world. A console briefly gets knocked out of place by an extra. Episode 5, The Empire Strikes Back. Space can be an unpredictable place. Yes, that rhymes, and you never know when you're gonna suddenly have to perform some quick evasive maneuvers on your travels. In the middle of an attempt to keep from colliding with another incoming Star Destroyer during The Empire Strikes Back, the crew on one particular Imperial cruiser learned this the hard way. But along with various Imperial officers suddenly being uprooted by their ship's jolting movements, it turns out that part of the Star Destroyer itself couldn't handle this swift change of direction. Look closely at the operations bay not long after the order of take evasive action is given. As one hapless Imperial extra goes crashing down to the floor, they accidentally collide with a control console which hilariously moves out of place. Likely hoping no one caught this mid-scene mishap, the extra then hops back up and helps move this anything but fixed box back into place. With so many officers being sent flying, most understandably missed this immersion-shattering accident amidst the madness. But that's undoubtedly a rather hollow prop being tapped away on in the moment, and seeing a poor background artist unintentionally reveal that thanks to their unfortunate bump will never not be amusing. Lando's disappearing gloves give away the stunt double. Episode 6, Return of the Jedi. Another example of so much chaos helping to obscure some of the details the minds behind the original trilogy didn't want you to notice. Return of the Jedi kicks off with a great deal of mayhem as Luke Skywalker and his pals attempt to rescue Han Solo from Jabba the Hutt. One of these pals was none other than Billy D. Williams' Lando Calrissian, of course. However, Williams isn't actually as involved in this death-defying rescue as he initially seems. Revealed in the moment Lando is sent tumbling off a barge and left hanging onto a rope for dear life, the rebel hero can be seen wearing a pair of gloves when trying to keep from being turned into Sarlacc dinner. When the camera moves in for a closer shot of Solo attempting to get his mate back aboard though, Calrissian is now suddenly not wearing mitts. Then as the barge is blasted later on, Lando once again appears to be donning hand protection. In reality, this was probably nothing more than a way to protect the stunt person playing a suspended Lando from some pretty gnarly rope burn. But that still doesn't change the fact that these evidently inconsistent hands were the result of someone not keeping an eye on continuity throughout this thrilling sequence. Chewbacca's mouth opens a little too wide. Episode 5, The Empire Strikes Back. The mighty Chewbacca can be seen and heard doing an awful lot of roaring throughout the original trilogy. However, there was actually a moment during the events of Episode 5 when the towering Wookiee got a little too overzealous with his growls. When Han Solo reconnects with his fellow scoundrel Lando Calrissian on Bespin, Chewie responds to the latter with a typical howl, or a to be more precise. But on this occasion, the way the mountain of fur roars reveals a bit too much about what goes into the creation of such a lovable alien sidekick. The mouth section of the Chewie costume appears to bend in a way that shows off some strange little holes within it, perhaps used to allow Peter Mayhew to breathe within the massive getup. And if that wasn't bizarre enough, this brief over-exuberant roar also makes it rather difficult to explain how a Wookiee actually, swallows their verkle, with there being no sign of a throat of any kind here. Perhaps this is simply a part of the complex Wookiee anatomy we humans are still yet to fully understand. But it's more likely that the Chewbacca suit was never designed to open its mouth quite as wide as it did when conversing with good old Lando on Cloud City, and the visual effects team were just hoping you wouldn't spot this rather surreal mouth moment. Jeans Guy, the Mandalorian. This entry proves that even some of the more recent Star Wars offerings can accidentally capture mistakes and errors on camera that you were not supposed to catch. Coming during The Mandalorian's Chapter 12, The Siege episode, as Din Djarin, Cara Dune, and Greef Karga engage in a showdown with some Imperial scientists, the left side of the frame briefly shows off a hilarious cameo from a crew member. Said person, now immortalized as Mando's Jeans Guy, was sporting a watch, t-shirt, and, you guessed it, a pair of good old denim jeans in their accidental appearance. And sure enough, once Disney caught wind of fans spotting this blink and you'll miss it arrival, it wasn't too long before Jeans Guy was erased from the galaxy far, far away. But they will still live on in our hearts, and who knows, perhaps down the road, somehow Jeans Guy will return too. Mark Hamill's Force Kick, Episode 6, Return of the Jedi. As Luke Skywalker fends off various villainous souls with his new green lightsaber, the son of the Chosen One unleashes a kick so powerful, it knocks one of Jabba's pals off the sail barge without even connecting with his skull. In the years that would follow this evidently botched piece of choreography / camera positioning, fans would joke that this was simply the Jedi Knight dishing out a rather effective force kick in the moment. And even Mark Hamill himself got in on the fun, responding to a fan on Twitter recently by asking, "How could anyone possibly be bothered by my widely celebrated perfectly executed force kick. Make no bones about it though, this was certainly a mistake unintentionally caught on camera, and one that George Lucas and Richard Marquand likely hoped you'd be too busy watching Boba Fett's jetpack malfunctioning in the background to care about. And while fans definitely weren't supposed to notice this mid-rescue flaw back when the flick first aired all those years ago, that still didn't stop them from finding a cheeky way to incorporate this gaffe into the epic story being told on screen.